How's everyone doing?
Well, hold on. It looks like we're getting close to 8 o'clock. I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
I'm good. I can't stand silence. I was like, I have to break it.
That's
I have to break.
perfectly fine. Now, so it looks like we're getting ready to start. So my name is Owen. I'm going to be moderating this panel today. So for those of you who I assume you all know, because you can see all the information, but today's panel is going to be a resume workshop. We have lovely Colton and Kevin here from Tespa here to joining us today to talk about resumes. Very, very exciting. Now for the two of you, we are recording this. It's currently live streamed on the new ICGN YouTube channel, and we're going to make sure to put the VOD up after the fact, just so you two are aware. But we're getting ready to get started just quickly. So for everyone in here who doesn't know, we have Kevin and Colton and I. We are not muted. Everyone else should be. That way we don't have anyone talking over each other.
Thanks for welcoming us in.
No, of course. We're very, very excited to have you. Before we start and get to any questions or talks about resume, do you two want to introduce yourselves? Tell us kind of what you do for Tespa.
Yeah, we do have a small slide in the presentation, just a little bit about ourselves. We're both community coordinators for Tespa, which just basically means that we help oversee all of our amazing community that are a part of Tespa. So a whole bunch of different chapters from all across America and Canada. It's really great to have time to, focus on the communities and help them build themselves up. And it's been really fun. But we'll talk a little bit more about ourselves in the presentation as well.
You got it. Sounds good.
Did you want us to go ahead and get started then?
Yeah.
Just wait one more minute.
I think we'll wait just one more minute. It just hit 8 o'clock. As soon as it hits like 8:02ish or so, we can kick it off. I think we'll have everyone ready and good to go.
That's exactly my thought. Esport time is always like 2 minutes behind, so.
Oh, absolutely. It's a different time zone. No, but while we wait to officially start the panel, we did have some exciting news today. Anyone watch the PS5 reveal?
It looks so pretty.
I know. I love the look of the thing, and there are some pretty exciting games, at least for me.
For me, I also participated in the memes immediately because I have no self-control. I posted the Washington State Monument, and I was like, wow, the PS5 looks so cool.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That was pretty good. I saw a lot of the router ones. The router was immediate, really.
The funniest ones to me were just Symmetra plastered over the thing. And it was like a Volvo or something, like one of the cars with the open doors on the side. I lost it.
No, that sounds so funny. I know we had a few people comparing it to like Eva from WALL-E. Oh, it was good. Yeah, it looks really nice. So kudos to them. I prefer the design far more to the Xbox kind of block.
It seems very, very sleek. I think it's definitely appealing to the eye.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we are about at that 8:02 mark. So if you two want to kick it off with that presentation.
Yeah, I'd love to. So, everyone, right now, I just go ahead and posted in the panel resources. I hope that's where I'm supposed to put that.
Yeah.
The link to the presentation. That way you can all have it nice and pinned there. And then let me open up my screen right now to start as well. Live. Yeah, that works. Don't flame me on all my slides. All my things open. I'm that kind of person.
Perfectly fine. Perfectly all right.
All right, well, I'll get started here then. So thanks for everyone coming to the workshop. This is our career workshop that we did back in May, and it's really fun. We did it for our community in Tespa, and so I hope that you all can grab a lot of really amazing resources from it as well, because it is freshly made after coronavirus came into play. And so we did include a couple of things in here about remote positions and how to make the best of it. As I kind of go into this, I did want to give a little glimpse into how we do this for Tespa. And so on site 2, you can see our core values. These are our core values at Tespa, and 2 of them that are highlighted are dream big and creating opportunity. We really believe in making sure that we can empower our community and everyone that we interact with these core values. And this presentation specifically attributes to both of these core values very, very heavily. Most specifically to me, obviously creating opportunity. We're really hoping this can, answer some questions, open some doors for you maybe. For some of you that may be a little more skilled, maybe a lot of this is just review, and that's totally fine as well. Really, we wanted to get this information out there and make sure that it was in a digestible way. And then also the fun part about this presentation is that we're happy to answer questions afterwards as well. So I think there's a questions channel in the Discord, so you can feel free to pop those in there at any point during the presentation. And at the very end, whatever time we have left, we'll try to answer a couple of them. Yeah. So presenters, so my name is Colton Bell, and this is Kevin O'Brien. It's with me as well. We did want to take just a quick second to kind of talk about ourselves, that way you knew a little bit more about us if you haven't seen us around before. But myself, I like to call myself the professional extrovert. That's something that I love being that out there person that goes and does a whole bunch of stuff. That's what got me involved in Tespa to begin with. I was a founder for my eSport club on my campus in Weber State University. And I've had a really good time starting that up and then finding my way into esports through that. It's really exciting and a really good way to start off my esport career being a founder of something. And it's been fun to meet everyone in the meantime. So ultimately, I did link my Twitter, Twitch, and LinkedIn there. Just for fun, if you wanted to connect afterwards, you can always send me like a DM on Twitter or a DM on LinkedIn and connect with me. I'm happy to connect with everyone in the esports space and answer questions if you have anything after this or anything like that. And I'll pass it off to Kevin if he wants to introduce himself as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Kevin, and I'm also a chapter coordinator with Tespa. I am not a professional extrovert, but I'm striving to be a professional extrovert. And so just kind of like a brief thing about me. I'm a graduate of DePaul University's Treehouse College of Business. And one of the things that I really love is kind of like the macro business side of esports, and kind of studying trends and research within the industry. I am from the Midwest. I live in Chicago, and I spent about 8 years working as a chef before pivoting into going back to business school. Yeah, I linked in my LinkedIn. I'm not very active on other social media platforms, so put my LinkedIn there. Feel free to reach out if you'd like to connect after this.
Yeah, so ultimately, what we're going to do in this presentation is we're going to go over a lot of some of the general information and then maybe some tips and tricks from us or some stories from us to kind of connect with those ideas and thoughts to maybe spur some ideas for you or spur some of that, beginning level of doing this stuff for finding careers. So when we go through this, a lot of this will be granular level, and a lot of this might be a little bit more broad, so feel free to reach out to us if you have questions about a certain thing. We're happy to go into them later, either after this presentation as we do the Q&A, or even later on if you want to DM either of us. Both of us are always happy to answer questions later on and connect with people, so keep that in mind as you're watching this. But ultimately, we're going to go ahead and start right off with the first steps. Obviously, finding your internship or job is a very, very important first step. Ultimately, we kind of broke this down into 3 kind of major phases that you can kind of think about. The first is obviously self-assessment, being able to reflect upon yourself, then researching the places to look at, and then developing your skills to fit that job if needed. So ultimately, we broke this down even further, and during the assess portion, you really want to assess your objectives. Like, what do you want in the world? And the best way I can kind of think about this is just looking at these questions. These questions that we listed here aren't ones that you have to answer every single one of if you don't want to, and it also is something where you can add on questions if that helps you figure it out more. Ultimately, what these questions are supposed to do is give you this example of what kind of industry you're looking into and what specifically in that. It kind of helps you narrow down your options and really help you figure out what you want to do most. The really cool part about this too is as you assess your objectives, you're also able to define yourself more. If you know what your purpose is and what you're trying to accomplish when you apply to jobs, you're going to have a much better ability to bring yourself out and talk to people during the interview portion, or being able to really put yourself on your cover letter because you know what you stand for and you know what you're bringing to the job. And so that's a really important thing about assess your objectives. Another really cool thing on here, this image, Ikage is a really cool Japanese concept. It's a pretty self-understanding image if you look at it for a little bit. This is something that just is kind of a visual example of what we're talking about to the left, of finding out what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and then what you're actually good at. And finding the middle of all of those things where everything meets is that ikigai. So really cool image of that exact same concept in practice. So when you're assessing your objectives, after you're able to do that, you can start assessing your strengths. These are the things that you're actually going to be listing on your resume and the things that you're going to be explaining to the recruiter or the interviewer when you're actually getting to that point. The thing about this that I adore and love is I'm kind of a strength fanatic. I will take every kind of assessment test that you give me or send my way, and I've probably already taken them because I'm that much of a crazy person for doing these. And the reason why is because I am a communicator at heart. I consider myself a storyteller. I consider myself someone who really wants to go out there and talk to everyone I meet. And when I assess my strengths, it's actually something that gives me a vocabulary and gives me kind of my own little lexicon of information that I can share to everyone else. Because when I read these assessments that I've taken, it helps me reflect on what my strengths actually are and how I can phrase them better and how I can word them better. A lot of these assessments, tell you things about skills that your strength would be useful in, or different things about how to work with people when you have a certain type of strength or skill. And those things are just giving you more and more reflection and ability to understand what you are good at and move on from there. We've actually highlighted two down at the bottom with links. Myers-Briggs and StrengthsFinder are two very, very popular and very, very good things to go off of. Myers-Briggs is a very popular, a little bit more personal-based test where many people kind of talk about, I'm an INTP or I'm ENFJ or whatever the thing is. And once again, this is something that, not based fully in science, but the idea behind it is still the same, where it's telling you everything that you are reflecting about yourself. And so if you are at a lack of those words, you can go ahead and go into an interview and use those things that you know from that Myers-Briggs test or that StrengthsFinder test and be able to pull those out in the interview. So for example, when someone talks to me about what my strengths are, I know I am an ENTJ, and extroverted is one of my biggest strengths, is one of the strongest ones. And so I'm going to think back to when I've read about that extroverted part of that Myers-Briggs test, and I can actually pull some of that information and explain myself better about why it's a good thing. Other big part about this is obviously researching. So research is that next step. Now that you kind of know your strengths and know your objective, you have to start looking for those jobs. One thing I have to highlight on here, there's a lot of information that you can feel free to look through, but I don't like always just reading the slides. The thing that's most important on here is that Hitmarker link. Hitmarker is one of the coolest things that I've ever interacted with. It is, you can follow them on Twitter, and they post basically every esport job that is going on in the industry that has any weight to be looked at. It is so amazing at how good they are at getting all that information and finding it. I actually remember just recently, my college just barely started a brand new esport program. We were hiring someone over all of esports, and I helped draft up the job description for it, and we had sent it out and posted it. And the next day, one of my friends in Canada saw it on Hitmarker and tagged me because he realized it was my same college. And I was like, wow, how did it get there that quick? Because it literally was posted the night before, and it was that morning, it was already on there, and we didn't contact them because I was the person that was helping post it. So it's really cool to have that kind of resource where you can have all the information being fed to you. And then also, you can always still check out all these other interest companies or aggregate sites, as well as companies that you're just interested in general, to look for these jobs. Most job descriptions also have some really major sections to keep track of, the info about the company, the different responsibilities and requirements you're going to have to be doing. So keep track of those because you will be using them in your resume and your cover letter. And then last up is skill development. So after you have a better understanding, you do need to make sure that you're understanding what those things in the job description are and how you're going to relate them to your resume. And so we have two really good examples here about what requirements translate to and what recommendations translate to. And as you can see here, it may not be as much as you probably think. Some people, I always use this example because I think it's a funny one. Most people have a recommended talent of Excel and Google Sheets in general. They have a pretty good recommended ability to do that. They've spent some time on it. They know the basic understanding. However, I will say that most people who put proficient in Excel on their resume are not very proficient at Excel, because it is a very in-depth program, and you probably need some more time to understand what a complex thing it is, and maybe give an example of a project you've worked on with Excel to be able to give that kind of comparison. And the cool part about this is that if you do know that you're at a recommended level for something and you want to get a little bit more proficient in it to make sure that you do fulfill the requirements, it still isn't this huge time sink of having to go to school for it and be the top of your class for 4 years in that one specific requirement. You can take on some special projects or different things like that to develop that skill, take like a little small learning class with it, and still be able to include that as your skill. So that's a pretty brief overview of the beforehand that a lot of people don't think about. But going into building a resume and a cover letter, this is where I think that Kevin does one of the best jobs. And so I'm going to pass it off him to go into this.
Cool. So I'm just going to kind of talk about, first off, building a resume. I think that this is probably the most daunting piece for kind of just like the job search process. And so, yeah, so some of the do's and don'ts of kind of when building a resume, you want to make sure that you are providing the best possible information that the company will want to see and eliminating all kind of, I wouldn't say fluff, but kind of unneeded information that the company, might care about, but might not use as like a, a very important piece when they're looking at determining between two candidates. And so, one of the big things is, making sure that you're using action verbs and tailoring your resume to the position and like the job description that you want. The fun fact on here that recruiters only spend about 7 to 10 seconds reading a resume. I mean, I can't read that much in 7 to 10 seconds. And so that comes down to a lot of formatting and just what is the quickest way that they will read and what's the first information that might hit their eye, and making sure that that information is the information that you would want them to see to be able to get you a second, kind of like a second interview or just kind of like a callback. And so when you, if you look at slide 14, there's kind of an example, kind of like a really nice templated out resume. And this is really good because it pulls it all the way to the sides of the document. And then it also has a clear indication where the education piece and the professional and then the skills at the bottom are indicated. And so it's easy on the eyes when you're looking at it, and it's you're able to you just kind of read through it easily. And then also having like your LinkedIn profile either attached to the resume or in somewhere in like the submission or email that you're sending in is very important. And then kind of moving forward, we listed out some useful resources. And so on slide 16, we've started putting together some useful resources and different areas that you might be able to find. Places for assessments, which is super good for learning a little bit more about yourself and kind of where you might fit into a certain company. And I think that stressing that is a big thing, kind of looking at the company as a whole and making sure that you're not just applying to a job to apply to a job, but applying to a company to apply to the company. Some people do really well in large corporate 5,000 employee type of companies, and then some people do really well in the 10 to 100 employee range for startups and small businesses. So I think knowing where your strengths lie is super important. And then moving on to kind of creating a cover letter. I think this is a very hot button issue right here. A lot of people say cover letters aren't needed. A lot of people will say this is a must. And I think that really all depends on kind of where you're at and what company you might be looking for. I think as a standard for all, including a cover letter really helps to kind of tell the story. It allows you to bring a personal connection and also add some clarity to your resume. And so that way you can provide minimal information on the resume and then provide the more broad information on the cover letter. And then another piece is if you're applying to, more of the smaller companies and more of the, I think like for Tespa, for example, Tespa, would really love to see cover letters, and they probably wouldn't want to see a cover letter that looks just like every single templated cover letter that you might find on Google. And so they really want to see more of the creativity side, the more piece that like really shows yourself. And so a company like Tespa would rather see that rather than like the templated one, and the larger companies would want to see more of that structured one. So just kind of finding that balance, I think, is big. And then if you go on there, there's some do's and don'ts. Definitely look over those. Some of the big ones there is overusing I and then spelling and grammatical errors. The 7 to 10 seconds, a lot of which are the first line of any like cover letter or like a resume has like a spelling or grammar issue, and it's heartbreaking. But when you have a stack of 100 to 200, it's very easy to see a spelling issue and just push it to the side and keep going. So making sure that it is 100% raring to go is perfect. And then kind of moving on into the interview piece.
So before I take fully back over, I want to call out just a couple more things for the cover letter, because I'm someone who does all of my resumes and cover letters always a little bit differently, and I always get flamed for it on some levels, but it's also gotten me most of my jobs for that same reason. And I am that person that when you get a resume or cover letter that is like ostentatiously crazy. Once again, I do not recommend this for everyone. However, a big thing about resume and cover letters is that 7 to 10 seconds that someone is going to be looking at it and catching their attention. And so for me, I always recommend if someone's having a really hard time with what they've been doing and they've just not been getting any callbacks, or you've been having a hard time doing your resume and cover letter and just can't get it, can't be happy with it. Try being more creative and making something that really is fun. To give an example, when I applied to Tespa, my cover letter was written as if I was a World of Warcraft hero accepting my questing call on the local quest board in my tavern. It was crazy and a little bit psycho, but it was so much fun to write that I was writing that and getting all the good information in there like crazy. It was so much easier for me to put that information into that cover letter by doing those fun things. And because I knew that I had a connection and that they were going to pull my resume and cover letter no matter what, and they were going to take a good long look at it, I knew that I could be at that little extra crazy and have a good time with it. And it paid out in huge dividends for me because it did make me stand out just even more than before. In a realistic world, obviously, making up that balance between both of those where you can have that fun is really important. And so what I recommend to a lot of people, or a lot of my chapter leaders that reached out to me and had issues with the resumes and cover letters, is I told them to just make them more fun. I said, you can always pull things back. You can always be told that, like, hey, you need to like have less color on here. Hey, you need to, make this a little bit more serious. But in my experience, when people make resumes and cover letters, they're often too dull and too boring, and that's the reason why they're thrown out. I see, maybe when I looked at cover letters and resumes for when I was doing hiring, I saw about 80% of the ones that were thrown away were the really, really boring ones that were just skipped past in an instant or had spelling errors, just looked bad. And then 20% of them were the ones that were maybe over, like, too much information or too hard to read or just too much on the page. And so when you think about that, it means that you probably should be beefing up your resume a little bit and your cover letter, because then you always can pull it away if it's not working for you, but you're having more fun, you're having a greater time, and you're getting the information on there that's more important. So just wanted to call that out as like a really cool thing for my style of doing resumes and cover letters. So as we move into the interview, I want to remind everyone that you can totally go and post any questions for me and Kevin to answer after this presentation is over. We're the last little piece of it, so we should only be like 5-10 more minutes. We're happy to answer those for the next little while, so please post them in there if you have any. So obviously for the interview, preparation is really, really important. I like to tell people that when you go into an interview, it's often really scary. I do not know almost anyone who says, oh yeah, I walk into every interview with like a huge smile on my face and like no care in the world. And that's coming from someone who is pretty close to that. I love interviews, and I always joke that if I can get to the interview, like, I know I can do anything because now I'm in person and I can like wow them. But even then, that still like dread and doubt is coming over you. And so the best way to get through that to me is to do this preparing. There's tons and tons of tips on here. And we even included an extra thing on this presentation where we actually have the phone interviews as well, because not only are phone interviews more popular nowadays, but with coronavirus and the world at a halt, phone interviews are basically going to be the way that most interviews are conducted. They're not going to be in person. And so there's a ton of tips on here. The ones that I do really want to highlight is having a quiet, comfortable, non-distracting space to work in. That's probably the most important that I've ever interacted with, because sometimes it seems like your place is going to be kind of quiet and it just ends up not being quiet. And I can tell you that it's really frustrating if the interviewer can't hear you or is being distracted by what's in the background. It's probably the most distracting thing I've ever interacted with. And so take that time to go and tell roommates, hey, I'm in a really important interview from this time to this time, because obviously they're going to be like stoked for you and they're just going to know and they're going to be able to help you out a little bit. Another really fun one on here that I think is really cool is to be comfortable. Feel free to wear something comfortable or nice. People say that, it's really up to interpretation here. Me personally, I go all out when I'm doing phone interviews. I want to dress up in like my suit and tux when I'm doing phone interviews, like even more than I would for a regular interview, where I'd just probably wear like a nice button down and a vest. Because in those clothes, I feel like super nice and like I'm on top of the world and like I could sell anything to anyone. And so with that mindset in my mind, it means that I'm going to be doing better. I'm going to be smiling more and sounding happier and brighter over the phone. And if you're one of those people that enjoys being dressed down, it's going to do the exact same thing for you. You're going to feel like you're not worried about it, like you're not being claustrophobic with the clothes, and you're going to be able to answer just that much better. Please feel free to look over the other tips on here or call them out in questions if you'd like to know more about any of these tips. But those are the two that really stood out to me the most, especially for phone interviews nowadays. Something else as you're doing preparation, it really doesn't hurt to look over common questions. This is something that I think a lot of people really forget to do when they go to interview. And it ends up like really detrimenting them, because sometimes you get asked like a really easy question, like the very first one on here, tell me about yourself. And they kind of like pause for a couple minutes. At that point, it's kind of almost weird because it's a really easy question. It's just like a fun thing, honestly. They want to hear about you and they want to hear how passionate you are, and take that time to think about those things beforehand. One really good call out I can make here is that when we did those things before about, learning your objectives and assessing those and assessing your strengths, those are things that are going to make you ready to answer these easy common questions because you've already thought through them and they're already in your brain. So if you did that before, it's going to be a really good thing to do. Something else that I have to call out on here, because I think it's something that all of us have maybe heard, but some people still do it to this day. If someone asks you what your weaknesses are, don't say nothing. It's probably one of the best questions you could ever answer. Me personally, doing interviews and things like that, this is the question that I think I remember most frequently when someone answers it well, and it's the one that makes me most impressed if they answer it well. And we gave you a suggestion on how to do it, but in simple terms, highlight what your weakness is. Be honest and explain why it's your weakness very briefly, and then take the time of the question, the bulk of that, to explain how you're improving on it and how you're going to turn it into not a weakness while you're doing that job or while you're progressing in your life. Because that shows a lot of problem solving and that shows a lot of self-reflection to your potential employer. And that's something that every employer on this planet is looking for. They want you to grow while you're in the job, and they want you to be honest and speak out against things. And by being able to be critical and show yourself that, it's a really, really good thing. And but also by doing this, you can always end on a positive note. The thing that I usually say when I go into an interview is I'm very vocal about the fact that I'm not organized. I have a lot of ideas and I have a lot of crazy concepts. And because of that, sometimes my organization lacks a little bit. And what I do to say that is I've downloaded many apps to make sure that I'm staying organized. I keep my life on Google Calendar, so I always know where my meetings and deadlines are. And I make sure to make that as less of a weakness as possible. And they can take that and go, oh, wow, he's really working on that. He's really doing a lot of good things, and he's already thought about this in past. So it can turn into a really, really powerful question. We added just a couple more questions on here. This is a couple more fun ones. People may have heard about horror stories from like Google, when Google used to answer these crazy questions. How many cows are in Canada? How many windows are on a 10-story apartment building in Manhattan? How long does do 10 light bulbs in one light last? Like crazy are things that people may have heard horror stories about. But honestly, you should look at these as way more fun. We do say to be ready for trick questions like this. They are getting popular after they came up for Google's things back in like 2010, I believe. But the thing to think about here specifically is that be ready for trick questions like this because they're not actually asking for an answer. Just like how in the last two questions we kind of mentioned that you could already have like an answer semi-ready. You should already have those goals in mind, the understanding in mind. When you think about this question, they're actually asking you how your problem solving works, how you look at a problem and how you're going to try to answer it. And that's ultimately what they're going to be doing here. So for the last little bit, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back off to Kevin for the interview do's and don'ts.
All right. Yeah. So I think, Colton, you kind of, hit the nail on the head with a lot of the interview do's and don'ts. And I think that I'm going to kind of use this time to actually talk about a question that was asked that I was actually responding to. So instead, I'm just going to talk about it. And so the question was kind of like, what kind of advice would you give someone who felt like they bombed the interview? And I think that this kind of parlays into the interview do's and don'ts because, I have bombed many of interviews, and I think that bombing an interview is actually a really good thing because it helps you learn kind of the process and what were the issues that kind of arose and how you could kind of learn from it. I think one of the biggest things is, taking that, okay, that was really hard. That was, it doesn't make you want to, try and go and apply and interview somewhere else right away. So kind of like making sure that you can disconnect kind of that personal, like hurt from it, and then also like be able to move forward and learn from the. It will help you, not have any issues with like those types of questions before a gig again. And then another piece is just practicing. As Colton mentioned, a lot of the questions that are asked, like, tell us about a time you solved a problem, or tell us about a time that you had like a situation between like two people, and as like a manager, you had to solve the problem, and how did you go about it? A lot of those questions aren't necessarily looking for like a right or wrong answer. It's just, okay, what is like the first thing that you're saying? How are you, kind of conveying that process to like the person that's interviewing you? And then also kind of what are some of the key things that you're saying and doing, and what does that show about like your type of like style? And so, the biggest thing that you want to do is you always want to be honest, and you want to be genuine, and you want to be you. Last thing you want to do is, make sure that you do everything possible to get your foot in the door and get your, a seat at the table, and then everyone's like, who is this person? Because a lot of the things is about trying to fit the culture. And so trying to change, you don't want to change yourself to try and fit in with the company. You want to make sure that the company works for you. And then I think a really big thing is after the interview, you definitely want to make sure that you send a follow-up. This can be in any form that you feel is best to the situation. I always recommend something that is handwritten. I personally have always just done just like a quick email, or just depending on the type of communication and the type of relationship that you might have with like the company already. And so that's kind of up to you. Sending a thank you note is very ideal. The only downside is it does take a fairly long time. And so if you feel like they're trying to make a decision quicker, I would, try and either get something hand delivered to them where you can kind of just like pass it off. But if you can't, just kind of emailing something out is still just as fine. And that kind of brings us to the end. I'm going to pass it back over to Colton.
Yeah, so we first want to thank everyone for coming into this presentation. We hope it was really valuable. This will stay open, and so if you need the link later or want to share it with anyone, like, we're happy to send it back to you. This is something that's going to stay available even if we refresh this presentation in the future. We'll have a brand new one to share. And so hopefully this was super valuable. We are going to go ahead and ask some questions, so feel free to answer some questions. So go ahead and keep typing things in there if anyone has any. But also, I wanted to thank something as well. Terrence Moore, who is a coworker for ours at Tespa, is the one who put this whole presentation together. So if you know Terrence, feel free to thank him for all the hard work he put into all the research and stuff for this presentation, because he did a really, really good job and made it really easy for me and Kevin to be able to present it. Yeah, so it looks like we have one question that hasn't been answered yet. Which is, when is a portfolio a value add for a job that wouldn't normally ask for one? Kevin, do you have experience with portfolios?
Kind of, but I can kind of give some clarity to just kind of like the amount of information conveying. And so if you're, writing a cover letter, or if you're sending something that you're able to kind of add maybe a link to another location to be able to show maybe like a portfolio, or some people might have like a website with a lot of their I think that's very important, because it provides a little bit more opportunity for the hiring manager to be like, oh, maybe, and then like clicks through or kind of looks through something else and then is like, oh wow, that's really cool. And so I always try and make sure to include any interviews that I've done in the past, or like any like podcasts. I just randomly was on one and I was like, oh cool, I can put this on my resume now. And it's kind of like a thing that I never really thought about, but always making sure to include, especially anything that is, if you were a part of your like collegiate esports group, anything that was in the papers, like always keeping track of those things. So yeah, I think that it's a value add is if you can work it in there, even if they don't ask for one, just kind of providing all available information about yourself possible.
Yeah, I see that someone's typing, and so just to add on to that, while maybe another question's being asked at the moment, I think that something that other people think is that less is more, and I'll be honest, I've never really thought that more isn't more. Typically, anything extra that you can add to highlight yourself and make yourself stand out is almost always value. The one thing I'll say with that is that the only way that it does start becoming less value is obviously if they've specifically requested you not to have something. When we talked about some companies don't like cover letters, if they don't like a cover letter, they'll usually tell you, because if they don't say it, they're probably happy to have one. And most of the time, in most companies I see now, you actually even have spots to upload those things, like a portfolio, or add your LinkedIn, or add a cover letter, even as optional things, and it'll say optional on it. So definitely have those things available if you'd like to, because they are going to be value adds. So Kenneth says, on the note of portfolios and similar compilations, what am I supposed to showcase as a primarily online event and tournament organizer? I feel like there's not much I can add other than a few bracket links, and there are very few ways I can show my individual contributions. So I'd actually love to answer this a little bit for you, Kenneth. I've worked a lot with online events actually previous to obviously COVID coming online and pushing a lot of stuff forcibly online. In a lot of my things that I work with, and I haven't specifically made a portfolio because that's not quite the job that I am in, but I have previously worked on a lot of presentations to give to when I was applying to different programs and applying to different groups like that. And what I found is that a lot of what I was able to present in those different presentations and in those groups was the work that went into it. So things like my planning documents that I wanted, I just went back to, I made sure they looked pretty and not the original brainstorming one, but actually being able to lay out, how I did what I did and what the goals were in mind and what the objective was. And maybe even what lessons I wanted people to learn from the event. Those things are always very, very valuable because they actually show a lot of planning on your end and a lot of knowledge about how to handle things. And that even though we were online, that doesn't mean that you can't find some ways to do things like photos or do things like recording. A really cool thing right now is that obviously this Intercollegiate Game Network is recording our presentation right now. That's something that even if you just added a link to it, even if the interviewer doesn't click on the link, they kind of understand that you're thinking about how to archive things for the long term. And those are things that are going to benefit you in that interview and in that recruiting process, because they're seeing how your work and how your experience is very in-depth and very broad. Kevin, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can speak on this because I also work for a company where we do hire online event and tournament organizers, and so one thing that is a big piece for especially hiring event and tournament organizers is how do you deal with situations that might arise, and how well do you put out fires? And so it's like, sending the links is perfect, and that shows that like the technical side of kind of you're able to run leagues and events, and then kind of going back on different things like what Colton has said, kind of like the other pieces to it, which is when issues arise, like how do you kind of handle those, and how do you ensure that you are not using the right kind of like verbiage and tone with users and players to make sure that any like what could be heated situations are able to you're able to like kind of bring down and settle out. And so I think that's a big piece. It's kind of hard to show that in a portfolio sense, and in that way, like I think the big piece is making sure that you have as much data to showcase the impact that you might have had doing tournaments and online events, and how many people and showcasing all those numbers that you might have hosted events for. Yeah. I don't know if Colton, you had anything else you wanted to add onto that, but I can jump over to the second question if you wanted.
Yeah, go ahead.
Cool, because I threw some eyes in there because I think this is a fun one right here. So I don't know the answer to this, and I think that everybody has different opinions on like how long should a resume be, and if it's 2 pages, what should happen? Should it be this and that? I think going back to that fact of the 5 to 7 seconds is super important. And so where I find that resumes could be long is if you have like a long, extensive like work history, or if you've changed careers and you have different things that you want to convey. But having that attention grabber right in the beginning to even make the rest of it worth it is super important. And so I don't know the answer there, but I feel that if you can grab the attention of someone who is looking through a stack of 100 to 200, then they'll keep reading. But most likely people won't actually read what's on the second page. So providing as much as you can on the first is really all that they're going to read.
Yeah, I feel like I have a decent answer for this too that may give you a little more insight as well. In my experience in esports, you should just be trying to go to one page. There are plenty of jobs where they do want you to have showcase your experience, and that really is where it comes down to having those extra pages to show how much experience you have. However, in a lot of the jobs that I feel like a lot of the community is probably applying to, it's probably an early job, maybe just a first couple of esport jobs, some of those entry-level positions that are very, very contested. And in that space, that's exactly what kind of those tips were for, is they're only going to look for 5 to 7 seconds. They are only going to care about that first little bit. And something that I can note too from working directly in the hiring world is there's a lot of programs that will just basically, it just grabs your resume and crunches it and spits back out the words that you put on your page. And that's what I used when I was doing hiring. And so if you have multiple pages, the words are going to be, it's going to be a huge thing of words. They're going to get way more bored because it's all going to be scrunched together. And they're probably going to look on like a lot faster. When you are able to do two pages or more, the nice thing there is that it's probably someone who you're either maybe handing a resume to in person, or it is that higher level job for a company that you've been working for a while. When you do know that they're going to be looking at that second page and you kind of can guarantee that, then it can be a huge benefit even in the esports world, because you are just showing all that extra experience that you have and you're going to stand out that much better. And so I'd say that's the big difference between the two, is if you know they're going to look at your resume and pull it and look at it for a good long time, 2 pages is probably a huge benefit for you. But 90% of the time, you should at least have one that's 1 page ready to go. That way you give yourself the best chance for getting the best information out as quickly as possible and snagging that interview.
Well, those sound like some great answers to some questions. I'm sure there are people that have questions that are worried to type them. But I'd encourage you guys to give any questions you can to these two. They're great resources on the topic. We have been going for about 50 or so minutes, or 44. I actually have a clock right next to me. So I'll just ask you guys maybe one more question to give anyone else who's had some doubts, has some things they'd like to ask, time to put that in the panel questions chat. But if not, after that, we can go ahead and get you guys out of here. So I was just wondering, you talked a lot about, like, on the resume, like the 7 to 10 seconds where people that are looking over your resumes are going to be looking. Seeing as how that's such an important factor, about how much time would you say you should put into formatting to make sure that you're putting stuff in order that is most likely to have, recruiters and people that are hiring look at the stuff you find most important?
I'll probably go first because I think Kevin will probably have like a really, really good answer to this, and I have a very quick and dirty answer, which is like 95% of it. For me, being someone that's very imagely drawn and wants to do a little bit more with my resumes and cover letters, I think that your formatting and what pops out first is number one. I'm a communications major that does a lot of graphics work, and ultimately your eyes are going to be drawn. It's called it's 3-2-1 rule, and your eyes are going to be drawn somewhere first, somewhere second, and somewhere third. And if those places are your name, your really, really like small, boring college or something like that you don't have like great stuff for, maybe you're highlighting something else like your experience, and then like your email, then it's kind of a waste of space. And so taking that time for formatting to say what is the eye drawn to first and what's most important on my page, take the time to make sure that that's the first thing up there. Take the time to write a really killer entry line or objective underneath your name, because that's the first thing they're probably looking at. Because if you spend the extra time on those things and the formatting of it, then you're going to get your point across most professionally. Kevin, did you want to go?
Yeah. Actually, Colton, I think you did a really good job. I don't have a great answer, but I think that a super important thing to note is kind of making sure, like Colton was saying, you have all that super relevant information, the attention grabber right in the beginning. And so kind of like, I don't know, I would just say like tailoring resumes and kind of like what is in the best areas and what information that you want to be conveyed in the first 10 seconds is very important. And so, just echoing what Colton said, but also just making sure that you kind of use that, okay, where are people looking at right away and what information around it could I have in there to make sure that it's very effective. And you could always have somebody, kind of review resumes and then ask them what are like the first like 5 things that jumped out to you, have them circle it, and then you can either change it if you don't want people to have those things jump out at them, or kind of accentuate that. So.
It looks like we did get a couple more questions, so I guess we'll go for those. So, Steven says, spacing, font size, font family, color scheme, where's the line between industry standard and dry for you? For me, because like I said, I am a little bit more artsy of a person on my resumes and stuff, industry standard is dry for me. I think what's expected from people is just that, it's expected. And so if you don't change it in some way, shape, or form, it's just going to get tossed in with the other 100 resumes. an example of actually a chapter leader that reached out to me recently and showed me his resume that I think might be a really good middle ground between maybe how I consider like top quality and what maybe other people are used to, is that he had a very standard resume and a very standard all of that. And all I told him to do was, I said, please take away the black and white, add your favorite color just as a line, just like maybe as like the underline somewhere. And because if someone does look at a resume, if they're looking at black and white the whole time, they may not agree with it. And the other thing I told him was that I loved that in his skills he put rock climbing. I don't know why that was so standout to me, but I can't rock climb. And I think it's really badass, everyone who can rock climb. And he just put it in his skills. And it was the smallest little thing. He really, really wanted a really standard resume because that's what he was applying to, and he knew that it'd be more favorable than a crazy, crazy resume. And it was something that stood out to me. That one little thing made his resume 10 times better than everyone else's that I had read in the last couple of days, because it was something that I remember even now. You can even tell that I'm still remembering it. And this was like a couple weeks ago. So I think industry standard is a little dry. So take that time to find that one little thing to bump it up if you want to still keep it industry standard, but move it away from the expectations.
Awesome.
I'll just echo that really quickly, and then make sure that you always have one that you can send into kind of like the corporate America world that is the template for what they can send through their scanners. So one that is easily readable and has like the proper spacing, font size, kind of like that PC and boring one. And then if you're sending it directly to like the hiring managers, you want to make sure that those stand out. So I think kind of having two is also very helpful.
Good thought.
Yeah, so thanks for the answers to the questions. It looks like we have one more person trying to type in a question. We'll give them a brief little bit, but while we're waiting for that, again, I'd like to thank you two gentlemen for joining us for the panel tonight. So everyone remember that presentation they gave, that link, it's staying up. You can go ahead and access it at any point. If you want, some help with doing a cover letter or doing a resume before you send it off, or to give it to someone to look over. And we will have a recording of this panel. Once again, it's going to be on the ICGN YouTube channel. We'll have the link to the channel and to the video up on the Twitter, so make sure you keep an eye out for that. You can follow it at twitter.com/UniGameNetwork. And now it looks like PhysioWits does have their question for you too. It's, what is your favorite part of the resume/interview process, and do you think it's reflective of how effective you actually are in the position?
Kevin, did you want to go first this time?
That's a good question. I think in terms of like on the hiring side, I think that the second that I can tell when the person that interviewing has become relaxed and is a little bit more natural, and when we can kind of like have a conversation, is when things become a little bit more clear, and you can kind of see like how effective this person might be in the position. It is very easy to see somebody that is trying to put on a like a cape, or try to say exactly what they think the person might want to hear. And I think the best part is when you can kind of see that person kind of just like relax and open up and actually be themselves.
Yeah, and my answer is the same for both the hiring and the actual participating in the resume interview process, and it is that first 2 to 5 minutes at an interview. I love interviews more than anything on this planet, which sounds like probably a psycho person would say, but ultimately to me that really is the chance for me to show my personality and be that huge smiling face that like lightens up the room when I walk in, and that's what I want to do. And if I'm going to be remembered by them when I walk out of the room, it's going to make their day better that they had like a good, fun, casual conversation and not like a boring run-of-the-mill experience. I want to make sure that I stand out and that I have a good time. That way they have a good time. And I think it is reflective of how you are in the position, because if I show that there, that's something to think about is, when he interacts with, clubs and organizations on campus, hopefully he'll be the exact same way, that he's bubbly and kind and really, really passionate. And since those are the things that are going to be positive in the job, then it's even more encouragement for me to show those in the interview.
Okay, thank you for answering that question as well. Sounds like you're saying the interview process is kind of, you already gave them all of your skills and what you're capable of in the resume, and this lets them know you as a person and how you will fit into the workplace.
Oh, wholeheartedly.
Got it. Well, everyone, make sure you guys keep that in mind when you're applying for jobs, and hopefully, if we use everything that we've learned tonight, we'll be able to get the job that any of us would be going for. Think we're in a good position to call it. Looks like we're chilling it out on the questions. So again, I'd like to thank you gentlemen for joining us tonight. Gave us some great resources, some amazing information, and some spectacular answers. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting us.
Of course, anytime.
Thank you so much.
So good night to everyone. Remember, just one last time, we're going to have the VOD of this panel up on the YouTube channel. Just be looking out for that. And then you also have the presentation to look over at any time. So I'm going to let you two gentlemen get on out of here, and the rest of you here at the panel can do so as well. Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks. Have a great night.